In Module 4, we will discuss risk control. Risk control is defined as the provision of appropriate levels and standards of protection for people, assets, income, and environment to avoid or minimize the pure risks which have been identified and assessed in an organization. Today, many companies consider risk control as the basis for effective risk management. Risk control has a significant impact on the organization's stability and continuity of operations. Risk control is preferred to the term loss control, since loss control suggests measures that only deal with incidents as and after they have occurred. The more important preventative and proactive aspects are included in the term risk control. It is important then to see risk control in the contents of achieving corporate objectives. Anticipated benefits should exceed losses, which could occur. Now, risk control techniques prevent losses from occurring or reduce the effect of losses once they have occurred. Most pure risks respond favorably to control measures and/or financing, but risk reduction techniques serve to prevent losses from occurring or reduce the effects of a loss once it has occurred. A risk control program needs to be managed properly. This requires that performance be measured against prescribed standards, like auditing. This following system gives guidance on what should be included in such a program. Here are some general principles of risk control measures. For risk control measures to be effective, they have to be compatible with other organizational objectives, appropriate and relevant, relative to other measures, applied at the appropriate stage, flexible, capable of gradual response for those that have a gradual onset, and integrate with other forms and levels of protection. There are four main techniques to risk control. These are risk avoidance, not to take on risk in the first place; risk elimination, eliminating an existing risk; risk reduction, reducing the frequency or likelihood and/or the severity or consequence of a risk; and finally, risk transfer, that is, transferring the risk to someone else or another place where it poses a smaller risk for the company. Within these techniques are the following options: physical, procedural, education and training, and legal. Any or a combination of these options may be used to achieve the technique decided on. Now, to explain how they may be used in practice, we will look at a few examples. Let us now look at these practical examples of risk control using physical options for avoidance, elimination, reduction, and transfer. For avoidance, we wouldn't erect a building or operation within the 100-year floodline of a river. Elimination would be using standby equipment to eliminate production loss due to breakdown of a vital piece of equipment, such as load shedding. Risk reduction, influencing the frequency or likelihood of an incident, such as a security fence would reduce the incidence of illegal entry. Risk reduction can also be on the severity or consequence, such as a high pressure release valve would prevent a vessel from over-pressurizing. This would limit damage to the vessel. And lastly, risk transfer. This is the removal of hazardous substances by a contractor. Let us now look at some practical examples of risk control using the procedural option for avoidance, elimination, reduction, and transfer. In this case, avoidance would prohibit the use of certain chemicals on a premises. Elimination would be to include safe work procedures, eliminating unsafe acts. The reduction of frequency or likelihood would be buying procedure to ensure compatibility. The risk reduction in terms of severity or consequence could be an evacuation procedure. And finally, risk transfer using procedural option could be the procedure to have hazardous waste removed by a contractor. Now let us look at the practical examples of risk control using the option of education and training with risk avoidance, elimination, reduction, or transfer. Firstly, risk avoidance, such as on-the-job training. Risk elimination, the first aid training to eliminate the severity of the injuries by applying appropriate and proper treatment. Risk reduction in terms of frequency or likelihood, fire prevention programs to reduce frequencies of fire. Risk reduction in terms of severity or consequence, having a fire drill to reduce the severity of a fire. And finally, risk transfer, having appropriate supervision. Now we look at practical examples of risk control using the legal option, such as risk avoidance, parking on own risk notice. The legal option for risk elimination, following manufacturer's requirements. The legal option for risk reduction, complying with legal requirements. And finally, the practical examples of risk control using the legal option for risk transfer, an insurance contract, disclaimer notice, or inspection by an accredited authority. Each organization, whether financial, service, or manufacturing, is exposed to pure risks. These organizations will all have their own peculiar risk and risk control measures. See if you can identify suitable measures to deal with these risks. Suppliers: failure to supply, supplying incorrect material, or late delivery. Services: a failure of service or inferior service. Electronic data processing: the description of information flow, breakdown, or fraud. Plant and equipment: breakdown, theft, or malicious damage. Stock: pilferage, destruction, or contamination. Transport: accidents, hijacking, and theft. Customers: loss of customers. The risk control area of labor force: riots, strikes, work stoppages, injuries, illness. Liabilities: injury to third parties, inferior products, professional advice, or environmental damage. Vital records: intelligence or information services, list of clients. In addition to the above risk control areas, there are also statutory risk control requirements. Now, many risk control measures are prescribed by law. Acts that apply to most companies would include the Occupational Health and Safety Act, or OSH Act. Then also there is the Mine Health and Safety Act, the COIDA, or Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Disease Act, Hazardous Substance Act, National Building Regulations, Explosives Act. There are also many other standards as prescribed by SABS or SANS codes. In any industry, it makes good sense to limit one's liabilities as much as possible. Making profits is fine, but having cost factors catch up with you in terms of claims can be detrimental to profitability and the organization. Management therefore has economical, legal, and social responsibilities. To ignore them is costly. The bottom line is that we will have to do more with less. We will have to be more efficient in our use of capital and human resources. A systematic risk management approach identifies leverage points within the system, initiating action at those areas that will provide the greatest leverage and the highest potential for success are addressed. To develop leverage action, we must work with fundamental issues, not symptoms. By following the risk management process, attention will focus on real issues to ensure that the organization will meet the following obligations: economical, environmental, social, and moral.